My own reflection stared back, a ghost in the grimy window, gaunt and confused. Where was I? The acrid smell of stale bleach fighting a losing battle against something deeper, sadder. The scent of despair burned my nostrils. Just this morning, I was pruning roses in my sun-drenched garden. Now, fluorescent lights hummed a sickening tune overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across peeling linoleum. This wasn't my home. This felt like an ending. And the ones who put me here? The ones who smiled and kissed my cheek as they signed away my life with ink and lies? My own children, Mark and Sarah. They thought they had it all figured out, thought their frail, aging mother was finally out of the way, their inheritance secured. They pictured me fading quietly into the background of this sterile nightmare. They had absolutely no idea that the woman who held my deepest secrets since kindergarten, my fiercest protector, was not only on her way, but carried the weight of the state behind her. Oh yes, they were about to learn. They were about to understand what happens when you try to bury someone who still has roots deep in the ground and friends in very high places. My name is Martha, and for 72 years, my life had been mine. I'd built it carefully. As a young woman finding her footing, I found my calling as a librarian, a guardian of stories and quiet truths. That's where I met David, my kind, steady husband whose laughter filled our home for 45 wonderful years before cancer stole him much too soon. We weren't rich, not in the way my son Mark measures wealth, but David was a planner. He'd made sure, meticulously, that I wouldn't just survive after he was gone, but that I could live comfortably, securely, in the cozy suburban house where we'd planted roots and raised our 2 children. The same house I still lived in, the silence sometimes heavy, but filled with memories and the riotous colors of the garden we'd cultivated together. After David's passing, I refused to let grief swallow me whole. Independence became my anchor. I poured my energy into volunteering at the animal shelter. The furry faces and unconditional affection were a balm. Wednesdays were for Bridge Club, a delightful routine of friendly competition and shared stories. And my garden, hours melted away there, my hands in the soil, feeling connected to the cycle of life, finding a quiet solace David would have understood. I managed my own finances, drove my trusty sedan wherever I pleased, relished my freedom. My health? Good for my age. A few creaks here and there, the occasional name momentarily escaping me, but nothing, absolutely nothing, that warranted being discarded like this. My children, Mark and Sarah. Love was there, of course it was, but it had grown complicated. Mark, my firstborn, chased success like a greyhound. Finance was his world. Suits, status, and the clink of money were his metrics. His comments about my big old house started subtly. Such a lot for you to manage, Mom. Often followed by a sigh that hinted at wasted potential, wasted equity. He saw assets, not memories. Sarah, my daughter, seemed softer, more easily led, often drifting in Mark's ambitious wake. She'd echo his concerns, her brow furrowed in a performance of worry that never quite felt genuine. Mark's right, Mom. Maybe it is too much. David used to joke Mark had the sharp mind and Sarah the soft heart, but lately it felt like they were sharpening each other, honing an edge I didn't recognize. Still, they were my children, my flesh and blood. The thought that they could orchestrate something so cruel? It simply never entered my mind. And then there was Ellie, my oldest friend. Since scraped knees on the playground at 5 years old, she'd been my confidant, my chosen sister. Fiercely loyal, whip-smart, with a core of unshakable integrity. Our paths diverged. My world became books, hers became law, justice, and eventually, a high-ranking investigator for the State Department overseeing healthcare facilities, including nursing homes. A demanding job, but our weekly calls and monthly lunches were sacred. She was the one constant, the one person besides David I thought truly saw me. The change wasn't sudden, more like a slow tide turning. Mark and Sarah began visiting more often. At first, I was pleased, thinking they were checking in, missing me. But the atmosphere shifted. Visits became inspections disguised as casual chats. "Mom, did you remember to take your pills this morning?" Mark would ask, his eyes scanning my kitchen counter. "Goodness, Mom, this rug looks a bit worn, doesn't it?" "Wouldn't want you to trip," Sarah would murmur, her gaze lingering on perfectly safe furnishings. Each comment, wrapped in a paper-thin layer of concern, felt like a tiny pinprick designed to deflate my confidence, to plant seeds of doubt in my own mind. One afternoon, I genuinely couldn't find my reading glasses. I searched the living room, the kitchen, increasingly flustered, convinced they'd vanished. 10 minutes later, I found them perched atop my head. A silly, absent-minded moment. Anyone could do it. But Mark, who called right then, seized upon it. "See, Mom? This is exactly what worries us. What if it was something important? What if you forgot to turn off the stove?" His voice held that tone of exaggerated patience that grated on my nerves. The next day, Sarah stopped by. "Mark told me about the glasses," she said, her voice hushed, conspiratorial. "Mom, we really need to think about getting you some help around the house. Maybe someone to keep an eye on things." Then came the focus on my finances. It started with offers to help pay bills online, progressed to questions about my modest investment portfolio David had so carefully set up. "Are you sure you're maximizing returns, Mom? The market's complex now," Mark would say, casually mentioning large sums that made my comfortable nest egg seem paltry. I insisted I was fine, that my financial advisor was excellent, but they persisted. "We just want to make sure you're secure," Sarah would add, her hand fluttering nervously. It didn't feel like concern. It felt like vultures circling, waiting. A persistent, low-level hum of anxiety started vibrating beneath my skin whenever their numbers appeared on my caller ID, whenever their cars pulled into my driveway. What game were they playing? The pressure intensified, not with open hostility, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. Mark took over sorting my mail, ostensibly to save me the hassle of junk mail. "You get so much rubbish, Mom," he'd say, handing me a suspiciously thin pile. Bills seemed to arrive late, or sometimes already slit open near the seal. When I pointed it out, he feigned surprise. "Weird. Must have stuck to my own mail. Sorry about that." His smile didn't reach his eyes. It felt deliberate, calculated, like he was controlling the flow of information, isolating me. Sarah focused on my independence. "Are you really comfortable driving after dark now, Mom? Your night vision might not be what it was." She'd insist on driving me to appointments, to the grocery store, framing it as a daughterly duty. "Let me spoil you," she'd chirp. But each ride felt like another brick in a slowly building wall, reinforcing their narrative that I was becoming incapable. Then came the push for power of attorney, more insistent this time. "It's just a failsafe, Mom," Mark argued during a Sunday dinner that felt more like an interrogation. "If anything unexpected happens, we need to be able to step in quickly. For your own protection." My refusal was met with frustrated sighs and exchanged glances. "You're being stubborn, Mom," Mark said, his voice hardening slightly. "We're only thinking of you." Against my explicit wishes, they hired a part-time caregiver, Mrs. Petrov. A woman with a perpetually dark expression and watchful eyes, she moved through my house with silent efficiency. Her duties seemed less about cleaning and more about surveillance. I once overheard her on her cell phone in the hallway, reporting my lunch menu and nap duration to Sarah in hushed tones. "Subject is resting now," she'd said, like I was some kind of specimen. It was deeply unsettling, feeling observed in my own sanctuary. I told Mark and Sarah I didn't need her, that she made me uncomfortable. They waved away my feelings. "Oh, Mom, she's a godsend. Give her a chance," Sarah pleaded, refusing to meet my gaze. They were isolating me, systematically painting a picture of decline to anyone who would listen, neighbors, cousins, even my hairdresser. My attempts to correct the narrative were twisted.
See?
She's getting agitated, they'd whisper, loud enough for me to hear. Gaslighting. Pure and simple. Making me question my own sanity. I confided fragments of my unease to Ellie during our calls, but shame and disbelief held me back from revealing the full, monstrous picture. How could I articulate the suspicion that my own children were plotting against me? It sounded paranoid, delusional. Ellie, consumed by a major fraud investigation she couldn't discuss, sensed something was off but accepted my reassurances. Just the usual family stuff. I'd lie, hating myself for it. If only I had screamed then. If only I'd trusted my oldest friend with the ugly truth.
But I didn't.
And the situation spiraled downwards, faster than I could have imagined. The endgame arrived with chilling speed. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and drizzly outside, matching the dread coiling in my stomach when Mark and Sarah appeared on my doorstep, far too early, faces arranged in masks of grave concern. They carried a thick manila envelope. "Mom, sit down," Mark said, his voice oddly formal. He spread a sheaf of documents across my polished kitchen table. "We need you to sign these. Just some updates, estate planning, medical directives. Standard things." He spoke rapidly, flipping pages dense with impenetrable legal text. Sarah hovered nearby, wringing her hands, avoiding my eyes. A cold wave of alarm washed over me. "Wait," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Let me read these properly. I should have my lawyer look at them." Mark's hand covered the papers protectively. "No need for that, Mom. Honestly, it's all very standard. We had our lawyer draft them. Everything is in order to ensure you're fully taken care of." He tapped several signature lines marked with bright yellow flags. "Just sign here, and here, and here." Sarah leaned in, her voice unnervingly high-pitched. "Please, Mom, just sign them. It'll make us feel so much better knowing everything's settled." They were practically vibrating with impatience, their forced smiles brittle. I felt cornered, pressured, suddenly exhausted by the constant battle. Was I being paranoid? In that moment of doubt, feeling overwhelmed and strangely intimidated by their unified intensity, I picked up the pen. My hand trembled as I scrawled my name, the ink sealing a fate I couldn't yet comprehend. It was a catastrophic mistake. A week later, the trap snapped shut. Mark arrived with a stranger, a Dr. Ramirez, introduced briskly as someone who would conduct a brief cognitive assessment. The man barely looked at me, his eyes cold and clinical. The assessment was a farce, lasting maybe 20 minutes. Rapid-fire questions, designed to confuse. He twisted my anecdote about misplacing my glasses into evidence of significant memory loss. My explanation of managing my finances was brushed aside with a condescending nod towards Mark. It felt staged, predetermined, utterly humiliating. Mark watched the whole thing with a look of solemn validation. 48 hours later, they delivered the coup de grace. Mark and Sarah stood on my porch again, but this time they weren't alone. Flanking them were a stern-faced woman in a drab suit and a large, impassive man whose presence screamed officialdom. "Mom," Mark began, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "Dr. Ramirez's assessment confirmed our concerns. And based on other evidence, the court has found you legally incapacitated to manage your own affairs." The world spun. "Incapacitated? Court? What are you talking about?" I gasped, staggering back. "This is insane. Mark. Sarah, how could you do this?" Sarah produced tears on cue, big, splashy ones that felt utterly false. "We had no choice, Mom," she wailed. "It's for your own safety. We found a lovely place for you, Meadowbrook. You'll have round-the-clock care." The woman in the suit stepped forward, holding up a document. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm from Adult Protective Services. Your children have been granted temporary emergency guardianship." We need you to come with us now to the Meadowbrook Care Facility. Meadowbrook. I knew the name. Everyone did. It was where people went when their families ran out of money or patience. It was a place whispered about in hushed tones. This wasn't care. This was abandonment. No, I shouted, blind panic surging through me. You can't force me. This is my home. Mark refused to look at me. Sarah hid her face, sobbing theatrically. The large man moved towards me, his expression unchanging. Please cooperate, Mrs. Peterson. Let's not make this difficult. They took my purse. Mark smoothly pocketed my cell phone. Better we hold on to this for now, Mom. Less confusing for you. In minutes, I was stripped of everything, my rights, my home, my phone, my voice. They ushered me out the door, past my blooming roses, into the waiting car. As we drove away, I looked back. Mark had his arm around Sarah's shoulders. For a sickening moment, obscured by her fake tears, I saw it clearly. A flicker of triumphant satisfaction, a smirk on my son's face. They hadn't just betrayed me. They thought they had erased me. Meadowbrook Care Facility wasn't just neglected, it felt actively malevolent. The pervasive smell, that grim blend of harsh chemicals, stale bodily fluids, and sheer hopelessness, clung to everything. Residents lined the hallways like forgotten statues, some vacant-eyed, others murmuring to themselves. The staff seemed perpetually rushed, their faces etched with fatigue and a profound indifference. My shared room was barely larger than a closet, the window offering a scenic view of a grimy brick wall. The woman in the other bed moaned softly, endlessly. Days dissolved into a monotonous blur. Lukewarm, tasteless meals served on plastic trays, medication rounds where pills were thrust at me without explanation, long hours staring at the ceiling, feeling despair seep into my bones. Mark and Sarah visited exactly once. They brought wilting carnations and performed concern, chirping about how much calmer I seemed, how secure I was. They controlled everything. Mail was vetted. Phone calls were forbidden, doctors' orders, they'd claimed, to avoid agitation. I was utterly isolated, a prisoner in plain sight. Hope, a fragile thing to begin with, began to wither. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe this desolate place was all I deserved now. The narrative they'd so carefully constructed started to feel real. Then one grim Thursday morning, the stale routine fractured. A palpable tension electrified the air. Staff scurried, wiping surfaces with frantic, performative energy. Hushed whispers echoed down the corridor. State inspection. Look busy. My heart, sluggish for weeks, gave a sudden, painful thud. And then they arrived. A phalanx of serious-faced individuals in sharp suits, armed with clipboards and scrutinizing eyes, swept through the main entrance. Leading them, her expression radiating competence and authority, was Ellie. Our gazes locked across the depressing expanse of the communal day room. For one shattering second, her professional composure vanished, replaced by raw shock, then dawning horror as she took in my frail appearance, the grim surroundings, the truth of where I was. I must have looked like a wraith. I managed to lift a trembling hand in a weak wave. She gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes momentarily filled with a fierce, protective fire I remembered from childhood playground skirmishes. Then the mask was back. She couldn't break protocol, not yet. But in that fleeting exchange, that silent acknowledgement, a tiny ember of hope, long dormant, flickered back to life deep within me. My Ellie was here. Not just my oldest friend, but investigator Eleanor Vance. And she had the power to rain down hellfire. Suddenly, I knew. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ellie played her part flawlessly. The inspection preceded by the book, her face an impassive mask of professional scrutiny. But the moment her official duties were concluded for the day, she requested a private consultation regarding a resident's concerns in the facility director's cramped, paper-strewn office. The instant the door clicked shut behind the nervous director, Ellie whirled around, her composure finally cracking. "Martha, what in God's name happened? Why are you here?" she whispered fiercely, grabbing my hands. The dam broke. Tears I hadn't allowed myself streamed down my face as the whole ugly story tumbled out. The calculated manipulation, the pressure, the forged signatures I now realized must have happened, the sham assessment, Mark and Sarah's chilling betrayal, the theft of my phone, the isolation, the despair. Ellie listened intently, her knuckles white as she gripped her pen, her expression hardening into granite. Occasionally, she'd interject with sharp, clarifying questions. When I finally fell silent, exhausted and trembling, she pulled me into a fierce hug. "Those monsters," she breathed, her voice shaking with fury. "Those greedy, heartless, conniving. How dare they treat you like this?" She pulled back, her eyes blazing. "Okay, Martha. Listen carefully. This facility? It's already got major violations piling up from today's inspection alone. But what they did to you, that's criminal. Elder abuse, fraud, unlawful confinement, it's serious. I promise you, I will get you out of this hellhole, and Mark and Sarah are going to face the consequences. We nail them. Trust me." Ellie was a force of nature unleashed. Using the full power of her position, she immediately obtained court orders for all relevant documents: the guardianship filings, Dr. Ramirez's complete patient notes, the financial papers I'd signed under duress. Forensic analysis confirmed it quickly. My signature on the crucial power of attorney and guardianship consent forms were blatant forgeries, poorly traced. Dr. Ramirez, facing state licensing board review and potential perjury charges, buckled under Ellie's interrogation, admitting Mark had heavily coached him and provided biased information to ensure an incompetency finding. Ellie also uncovered Mark's recent financial activities, attempts to liquidate my stocks, transfers from my savings into his personal accounts. The web of deceit was unraveling fast. The reckoning was scheduled 2 days later. Ellie arranged a formal meeting at Meadowbrook, ostensibly to discuss Mrs. Peterson's care plan and potential discharge options. She mandated the presence of Mark, Sarah, and the increasingly panicked facility administrator, Mr. Henderson. And she insisted I be there. When Mark and Sarah walked in, they exuded a smug confidence, likely assuming this was just another bureaucratic hurdle before they could fully consolidate their control, maybe even move me somewhere cheaper. We sat around the small, grim conference table under flickering fluorescent lights. Ellie started calmly, outlining standard procedures. Mark tapped his pen impatiently. Sarah nervously adjusted her scarf. Then Ellie leaned forward, her voice dropping, acquiring a sharp, dangerous edge. "However," she said, locking eyes with Mark, "a review of Mrs. Peterson's admission has revealed profound and disturbing irregularities." She slid the first document across the table, the forensic report detailing the forged signatures. Mark's smugness evaporated, replaced by disbelief. Sarah gasped, her face draining of color. "That's ludicrous," Mark sputtered, trying to regain composure. "Mom signed those papers. We were there." "Were you?" Ellie countered, placing Dr. Ramirez's signed affidavit next to the report. "Were you also there when you coached Dr. Ramirez? When you fed him misinformation to ensure he declared your perfectly competent mother incapacitated?" Mark recoiled as if struck. Sarah stared at her brother, horror dawning in her eyes. Ellie didn't relent. She laid out the bank statements, highlighting Mark's illicit transfers. "And I suppose these transfers, initiated just days after the fraudulent guardianship was granted, were also standard procedure." Sarah let out a choked sob. "Mark, you took her money?" Mr. Henderson looked physically ill, sweating profusely. Ellie listed the potential charges: forgery, wire fraud, perjury, conspiracy, felony elder abuse. Each word landed like a hammer blow. "Your temporary guardianship," she concluded, her voice ringing with authority, was obtained through criminal deceit. It is null and void. Effective immediately. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. The arrogance was gone, replaced by sheer panic. Sarah openly wept, finally understanding the abyss they'd created. He told me it was the only way, she cried, pointing a shaking finger at Mark. He said she was spending too much, that she wasn't safe. I didn't know. I didn't know about the signatures, the money. Their alliance crumbled into mutual accusation and despair. I watched them, not with rage, but with a deep, aching sadness for the children I had raised, the love they had so casually incinerated on the altar of greed. Ellie turned to me, her expression softening. "Martha," she said, her voice clear and strong, "you are free. Free to go home. Free to make your own decisions. This nightmare is over." A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled my knees, washed through me. I pushed my chair back and stood, shaky but upright. I met the terrified eyes of my children. I didn't need to shout or condemn. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of finality. "You will leave my house keys on this table. You are never to contact me again. You are no longer my children." The utter devastation that washed over their faces as they absorbed the full, irreversible consequences of their actions. That was my justice. That was enough. Walking out of Meadowbrook with Ellie felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into blinding sunlight. The air outside, even city air, smelled impossibly sweet and fresh. Ellie drove me home, back to my sanctuary, the house that held my life's memories. Stepping across my own threshold, inhaling the familiar scent of lemon oil and aging paper, seeing my vibrant garden through the window, alive with color, it was an emotional homecoming I could barely process. Tears welled, but this time, they were tears of relief, of reclaiming my life. The legal repercussions for Mark and Sarah were severe, though perhaps not as severe as they deserved in my opinion. Facing Ellie's mountain of evidence, they pleaded guilty to several charges, avoiding trial but not conviction. Probation, substantial fines that wiped out much of Mark's ill-gotten gains, mandatory community service, and permanent records followed. The social consequences were arguably worse. In our community, words spread like wildfire. Their reputations were obliterated.
Doors closed.
Invitations stopped. The status they'd craved, the status they'd betrayed me for, turned to ash. My first act, naturally, was to meet with my lawyer. We revoked all previous wills, ensuring Mark and Sarah were completely and irrevocably disinherited. My assets were secured, my future protected. The locks on my house were changed. The first few weeks were a period of quiet healing. Sometimes, a shadow of the betrayal would pass over me, a phantom ache of loss. But Ellie was my steadfast anchor, calling daily, bringing over meals, sitting with me in the garden, simply being present. Slowly, surely, I rediscovered my rhythm. I returned to the animal shelter, finding comfort in the uncomplicated affection of the animals. I rejoined my bridge ladies, who welcomed me back with warmth and discretion. Life settled back into a familiar, comforting pattern, but I am not the same woman I was before. I carry the scars of their betrayal, a painful wisdom I never sought. I learned that evil can wear the face of love, that greed can rot a soul from the inside out. But I also learned about my own strength, about the incredible resilience of the human spirit, and about the immeasurable value of true, unwavering friendship. Ellie didn't just rescue me from a physical prison, she rescued my spirit. Sometimes, when I'm kneeling in my garden, hands deep in the rich soil, the sun warm on my back, I think of Mark and Sarah. The anger has faded, replaced by a distant pity. They chased wealth and status, and in doing so, lost everything that truly matters.
Me?
I have my home. I have my independence. I have my peace. And I have a friend whose loyalty is worth more than any inheritance. That, I believe, is the richest ending imaginable.